Welcome to the InfoWars Nightly News. I'm David Knight. It's Monday, December 8th, 2014. Here are our top stories.
Tonight, riddles surround the 36th banker death of the year. Then, the controversy at state and national parks. And some speculate the chokehold isn't what killed Eric Garner. That's next on the InfoWars Nightly News.
But just the information I have to look at is torture, because I know how evil the globalists are.
Well, the mortgage crashes were not a mistake, they were a plan. Even before the ink dried on the bank bailouts, they were looking to extend their derivative markets in all new directions. And of course, the House Republicans have been more than happy to help them since 2008. Just last year, look at this report from Curt Nimmo. He said the House voted to get banksters back in the derivative business. And of course, he pointed out that in October of 2013 last year, the House passed a bipartisan tweak to the Dodd-Frank bill that Congress had earlier passed as a reform after the bankers nearly crashed the financial system back in 2008. And he points out, though, of course, Dodd and Frank were both Democrats, and he points out there's another Democrat, Jim Hines, Democrat of Connecticut, has received $66,450 from Citigroup. And he's writing the legislation for him. We're seeing that yet another year passes, and they're trying to do it again, this time putting it into the December 11th resolution, trying to get a continuing funding for the government. As he pointed out this weekend, Curt Nimmo pointed out, bankster lobbyists tried to sneak derivatives bailout and budget legislation. Here we go again. Curt pointed out this weekend that Dodd-Frank codified too big to fail. It hammered small businesses. It protected bankster investors. It jacked up the prices consumers pay for bank services. It interfered with basic market functions. And it set the stage for the next economic disaster planned by the financial elite. And how are they going to do that? Well, of course, they're going to insure additional derivatives, tie them into the FDIC. As we see from this article from Michael Krieger, Wall Street moves to put taxpayers on the hook for derivative trades. He showed the actual drafts from Citigroup that have been put forward by their puppet, Jim Hines, and showing the final bill. And you can see that they have copied it almost verbatim from the city lobbyist. Now, our interview today is with someone who was one of the first whistleblowers back in the S&L crisis of the 1980s. He's also done a lot of investigation about this most recent crime of the big banks in the 2000s. He's laid out the criminal case for tax evasion, tax fraud, security frauds, and he's traced the flow of money through to the Swiss banks and into black operations. A former military man, he's very concerned about that, as we've also seen with these recent lawsuits from a lot of military vets and their families. He's also going to offer you a plan of action, a way that you can help to expose these crimes. He's going to lay that out very thoroughly for us. Now, it also is pretty clear when you see these bankers at the epicenter of these globalist major crimes and a lot of money being moved around criminally. We've seen this year a lot of banker suicides. We're going to talk about that in the interview as well. This most recent article that came up this weekend, we now have the 36th dead banker of the year. Yes, yet another. 36 in 1 year. Very suspicious circumstances for all of these. Now, the other thing we saw this weekend was the public trashing of the reputation of Eric Garner, the man who was choked to death by the police, trashing him as being too fat. They're not criticizing him for being black, but his fault, the reason he's dead is because he was simply too fat. Point out the fat shaming of Eric Garner. This is from The Atlantic. They say Representative Peter King, and a Republican from New York, actually he's from the Staten Island area, I believe, told CNN's Wolf Blitzer that Garner would not have died during an arrest by NYPD officers had he been more physically fit. He said, you have a 350-pound person who is resisting arrest. If he had not had asthma and a heart condition and wasn't so obese, he almost definitely would not have died from this. So I guess the lesson for all of this is that we need to get into better shape so we can survive the beatings from our slave masters and their overseers. Actually, the union got into this as well, saying that they're being demonized about this. They say police say the outcry has left them feeling betrayed and demonized by everyone from the president and the mayor to throngs of protesters who scream at them on the street. And this is what the president of the police union had to say, Patrick Lynch. He said, police officers feel like they're being thrown under the bus. Well, I think that's kind of interesting because it was that same fellow, Peter Lynch, who threw the EMS people under the bus back in August. If you remember, it was very clear from the coroner that it was a case of homicide. she made it very clear that he was choked to death. It was trauma to the throat. And of course, at the time when that was reviewed, they pushed back on that. Peter Lynch, the head of the police union, said that he thought that as they looked at these throat injuries, he thought that might be consistent with the type of compression, he said, and damage to the neck and chest, consistent with life-saving techniques that EMS or emergency room technicians would do in a situation like this. It's consistent with that and not consistent with a chokehold. But when famous forensic pathologist Michael Baden took a look at this report, he said there were 10 hemorrhages on the inside of the neck, in the muscles of the neck, hemorrhages in the eye, hemorrhages in the tongue. All of those are evidence of neck compression. In other words, this guy was killed. It was a homicide due to what the police did to his neck. But of course, the head of the police union throws EMS under the bus. What was being said about EMS at the time? Well, back at the time, in August, the New York Daily News pointed out that 4 minutes into a 7-minute video clip, 4 EMTs arrived, but neither they nor the 8 cops standing around Garner as he lay on the sidewalk could be seen trying to help the unconscious man. What did they do? Did they do something that was consistent with what this police union officer says, that these kinds of interventions from EMT would have caused him to have 10 hemorrhages in his neck and his eyes? No, they had one emergency worker who checked his pulse and told the apparently lifeless man that help had arrived. As a matter of fact, their non-action was so severe that the 4 EMTs, who apparently did nothing to aid him, as they point out in the New York Daily News, had been banned from responding to any calls until the investigation was complete. So we see that a big part of the problem, a big part of the systemic problem, are the police unions. And they're willing to throw anybody under the bus, willing to blame this man's death on his obesity. Although there is a pattern of behavior from this very officer. Immediately after this happened, Staten Island Live, SILive.com, reported that the city had paid out $30,000 to settle a 2012 lawsuit against chokehold cop Daniel Pantaleo. This is the same guy who choked Eric Garner to death. They had already paid out $30,000 in a similar situation. We see a pattern of behavior with this particular cop. We see a pattern of behavior with the police unions. We see a pattern of behavior with the non-prosecutions from the district attorneys. It continues to go on and on. Now, stay with us after the break. We've got a couple of important reports. You can find out how you can opt out of Obamacare, a way to get out of the mandates that is good for libertarians as well as for Christians. And we also have a report as Peter Gruber is preparing to go before Congress and talk about how he twisted the data and lied to the American public to deceive them. We have a report about how he did the same thing and Grubered the data about abortions to try to convince people to have abortions. Stay with us. Be right back.
The Molon Labe Silver Coin, certified by the Provident Mint. This 1-ounce silver round is 0.999% fine silver, inspired by the legendary Spartan king Leonidas and his refusal to lay down arms in defiance of Emperor Xerxes. Molon Labe, that's Greek for come and take it. This is available now at NoWorldOrder.com. Act now as supplies are limited. And don't forget, free shipping and a free gift. That's InfoWarsStore.com.
For all of recorded history, civilizations around the world praised the health benefits of silver. At InfoWars Life, our mission is to bring you the highest quality, purest, cleanest, effective colloidal silver on the market today for the lowest price available. You don't have to be a doctor to know. The fall and winter months are the most dangerous time of year in North America when it comes to you and your family's health. InfoWarsLife.com is very excited to announce our biggest run yet of Silver Bullet colloidal silver, exclusively available at InfoWarsLife.com. Now, InfoWarsLife.com has taken colloidal silver to the next level using a cutting-edge technique that is free of toxic artificial additives. Now more than ever, it's important to stock up on high-quality Silver Bullet from InfoWarsLife.com and to help others during Christmas by teaching them about the powerful benefits of silver. Secure your Silver Bullet today at InfoWarsLife.com or by calling toll-free 888-253-3139.
Now, of course, you can't make the GOP actually do anything to stop Obamacare, but you can opt out personally. We have a solution for libertarians and for Christians. Here it is.
Hey guys, Rob Dew here from InfoWars Nightly News, and I want to talk about solutions. One of the things we talk about a lot on InfoWars.com and in the documentaries and videos that we make here is that you are the solution. You have to be part of the solution. If you wait for others to do it, you're going to be waiting a long time. You need to stand up and become active and get involved in the game. One way to do that is by saying no, opting out, like with the TSA, or spending your dollars locally instead of at a big box chain. These are all ways that you can get involved. Well, now we have Obamacare, and this is a big medical tyranny thing. And here's just a little bit of what Alex Jones has to say about Obamacare earlier this year.
Basically, it was a blank check to do whatever they want. Share all your data, NSA the medical records, federalize it, give it to all these corporate interests, kick people off their existing plans, kick people off that had pre-existing conditions, not cover children, lower the quality of care, double, triple, quadruple prices, shut down small healthcare divisions and providers, small insurance companies and HMOs, small clinic chains that help the poor. I come from a family of physicians and healthcare management. I mean, I know about this stuff. And I had doctors on, I had researchers on. The insurance companies bragged that they wrote it. They lobbied to get it passed. The Republican leadership helped write it. And I said, this is a bipartisan screw job, and it's really going to hurt people.
So most of you watching this are going to agree that Obamacare is not a good thing. It was written by the insurance companies, and you know all the rest. But what I want to talk about are ways to get around Obamacare, especially the fees, because starting in 2015, the fees are going to get bigger. In fact, here's what it says on healthcare.gov. If you don't have coverage in 2015, you'll pay the higher of these two amounts: 2% of your yearly household income, or $325 per person for the year. The maximum penalty per family using this method is $975. So if you have a family of 4, you're going to be paying close to $1,000 in fines for 2015, and it's only going to go up. You've seen the articles on InfoWars. We've read emails out from people of others out there who've seen their rates rise or have their plans cut. They've seen prices double. Some people are paying more for their health insurance than their mortgage on their house. But you remember what Obama said.
If you've got health care already, then you can keep your plan if you are satisfied with it.
If you like the plan you have, you can keep it.
I intend to keep this promise. If you like your health care plan, you'll be able to keep your health care plan.
If you like your plan and your doctor, you can keep them.
You'll be able to keep your health care plan. If you like your plan, you keep your plan.
If you like your doctor, you like your plan, you can keep your doctor, you can keep your plan.
If you like your current insurance, you keep that insurance. Period.
So what do you do? Where do you go? Is there an alternative to this skyrocketing insurance where it's got super high premiums and deductibles that have been calculated never to be reached? But before we get to these solutions, let's just look at one instance here of insurance companies and their disreputable dealings. Here's what advocate Dr. Margaret Flowers had to say about the health insurance system in New York State. I think looking at our Blue Cross program here, and what they found was that about 1 out of every 5 claims was denied just randomly. Like if 5 claims come in, they just pull one out and say they're not going to pay this one. And we have evidence of this in New York from people that worked in these claim offices, that if there was a certain level area of the city, lower income area, they would deny those claims because they knew people didn't have the resources to fight back. All the more reason to get out of a system that wasn't even designed to help you in the first place. A little over a year ago, me and my wife had the same problem. I saw insurance as a scam. I was sick and tired of paying the high premiums and the deductibles that you can never reach. And then we heard from a neighbor about a program called Samaritan Ministries. It was started back in 1994 by Ted Pinniger from his home in Washington, Illinois. The group has since grown to 36,000 member households participating, and they have around $9 million available each month to meet healthcare needs. They don't consider themselves health insurance. What they call it is health sharing, and here's how it works. Health sharing is a biblical approach to paying for healthcare based on passages such as Galatians 6, verse 2, which says, "Bear one another's burdens, so fulfill the law of Christ." The law is the royal law of loving one another. So each member commits to sending a set share amount each month. These shares are sent directly through the mail from one household to another member with needs. Samaritan Ministries uses a database that randomly matches shares to needs so that sharing is coordinated and that shares go to the appropriate members with the needs. Our share, by the way, is just a little over $400, and that covers a family of 5, and that's what we pay per month. One section which I like on their website is called accountability, which is a word you do not see on many major health insurance sites. So I'm taking money out of this bloated giant bureaucracy that we call healthcare, the insurance system, and sending my money directly to people to help them with their medical needs. It's a great way to participate in your community and just help one another. Plus, when you need to use the services, they're there for you. And by participating in this, I get to bypass those Obamacare fines. That's right, Samaritan Ministries and a few others I'm going to mention are grandfathered in, so they're not beholden to the laws of Obamacare. Now, they do have a questionnaire and a few forms they want you to fill out, and they want you to attend church, and you have to have your application and any claims signed by a pastor. So if you don't attend church, you might want to find one in your area. And also, you need to take a long look at SamaritanMinistries.org. It's got all the questions, everything you can answer that I couldn't possibly get to in this report. Earlier this year, we had an unfortunate incident, and it cost us over $600 in medical bills. After filling out the forms and sending everything in, we got over $500 back. And this was our first experience using Samaritan Ministries, but let me tell you, I feel good about using it, and I think you should check it out and really give it a try, and it's a great way to get out of this Obamacare system. So this is one way you can get out of the system, stop feeding it, take away its fuel, thereby taking away its power. It's a great way to do it. Now I'm going to describe a few more here. The article, Opting Out of Obamacare Through Medical Sharing Ministries, focuses on Medishare. Founded in 1993, Medishare historically grew at roughly 10% a year. Since Obamacare passed in 2010, the growth has ticked up to about 15% as some Americans look to end-run the mandate. About 150,000 people are members of medical sharing ministries, and 60,000 of them belong to Medishare, according to Medishare President CEO Tony Meggs. The Obamacare fee exemption requires health sharing ministries to have been in operation before December 31st, 1999. So if you're looking at one that's been around since the 2000s, you may want to take a quick look because they're probably not going to be able to opt out of this Obamacare fee system. So we've looked at Samaritan Ministries and Medishare. The final one here is called LibertyHealthShare.org. They call their system a tried and true cost-sharing method that works. Liberty Health Share is a reorganization of an existing group that has been sharing costs since 1988. They have been operating successfully for decades because it works. During that period, over $20 million has been shared to meet each other's costs. Medical cost sharing is currently being used by thousands of families nationwide, meeting their health care costs each month. And you can look on their website. They have sections like person-to-person sharing, how the funds are used. They also talk about accountability, which I think is great. And they have 3 different option levels you can get into, so I suggest you check those out and see if they meet your needs. And finally, there's a group out there called greeninsurance.com, which sets itself up as a co-op, and they have a couple membership levels, and they offer to provide up to 100% alternative medicine coverage for services like acupuncture, cleansing, detoxing, even massage. But this site looks brand new, so I don't think it's going to qualify for that Obamacare exemption, but you may want to call them and find out or send them an email. So there are alternatives out there. I'm using one of them, and it works for me. It lets me opt out of Obamacare, and let me tell you, that is one way to defeat the system. Thanks for watching. Be sure to subscribe to this channel and share this video to everybody you know, especially if they're looking for a way to get out of Obamacare. And in the comments section, I'd like you to write if you're using a health sharing service, which one you're using, and if it works for you. And if you're a government-paid troll, please tell us how that government-paid health insurance is working out for you. And if you're interested in taking control of your own health, check out InfoWarsLife.com for our complete line of nutraceutical products. This has been Rob Dew for InfoWars Nightly News. Thank you, and stay healthy.
DNA Force. When cells become toxic, they die early and aging sets in. DNA Force. No one has put together a formula that focuses directly on brain health, nerve growth factors, and optimizing your cellular energy at the same time. Just one of the key compounds, BioPQQ, is backed by major clinical studies. DNA Force. We now have the synergistic solution. Secure your DNA Force today at InfoWarsLife.com or call toll-free 888-253-3139. DNA Force.
Introducing the first proprietary oxygen-based intestinal cleanser, OxyPowder, backed by FDA-approved Phase 1, 2, and 3 clinical trials. All the toxins from the air, the food, the water, ultimately ends up in the gut or affects the gut. Take your health into your own hands and start cleansing your body today with OxyPowder. Secure your OxyPowder today at InfoWarsLife.com. That's InfoWarsLife.com.
Well, as John Gruber prepares to go before Congress and explain why he tortured the data, why he deceived the American public, we find that he also was Grubering the data to convince people to have abortions as well. Here's that story.
Obamacare architect Jonathan Gruber is not just satisfied with selling the too stupid American voters a healthcare law based on deception and non-transparency. No, now Gruber has been exposed as an abortion advocate of the eugenicist variety. Now, during the Clinton years, Gruber co-authored a paper titled Abortion Legalization and Child Living Circumstances. Who is the marginal child? He argues that legal abortion had saved the U.S. taxpayer upwards of $14 billion in welfare benefits and that it also lowered crime. He argues that abortion of marginal children is a social good. If these marginal children, or urban poor, had been born, they would have been more likely to live in a single-parent household, live in poverty, die in infancy, and be in a household collecting welfare. I was raised by a single mother in low to middle class neighborhood. I even grew up some of those years on food stamps. But according to Jonathan Gruber, I would have been better off if I had never even been born. And this is a lie that they sell to these young women, that they might as well just get rid of their children because they'll never be able to make it and they'll never rise up out of poverty. They won't amount to anything. They won't be able to afford it. So this is just a huge lie. And let's point out that this is the same exact man who's in charge of drafting our national health care law. So, no need to worry about death panels. And also, remember this.
There are also those who claim that our reform efforts would ensure illegal immigrants. This, too, is false. The reforms I'm proposing would not apply to those who are here illegally. It's not true. And one more misunderstanding I want to clear up. Under our plan, no federal dollars will be used to fund abortions, and federal conscience laws will remain in place.
It turns out that was a lie. According to a new report from the Government Accountability Office, Obamacare is filled with abortion subsidies and plans that indirectly fund the procedure, forcing taxpayers to subsidize abortion. And as we've reported before, most of these abortion clinics are set up in Black and Hispanic neighborhoods. In New York alone, there were more Black babies killed by abortion than were born in 2012. And in New York alone, nearly 78% of all abortions performed were of Black or Hispanic children. Now, former abortion clinic director Carol Everett exposed that the industry seeks to find a constant stream of new clientele by infiltrating public school systems. And she also revealed how they specifically seek to target the fastest growing minority groups.
Well, I want you to think of this as a business. People don't think of it as a business, but they have to expand their market. And who is their market? It's the woman who's having an abortion. And so who is the longest term customer for an abortion clinic? It's a woman early in her teens who is going to continue using abortion as a method of birth control throughout her childbearing years. So they go into the schools with, our goal was 3 to 5 abortions between the ages of 13 and 18. But you cannot just go to these kids when they're 12 and say, I want you to start getting pregnant. So what we did was we worked to create our market by breaking down the natural modesty, separating the children from their parents and their values, and becoming a sexpert in their lives. My commission was $25. My goal was 40,000 abortions a year so I could be a millionaire.
Wow.
The last month I was there, we did 545. My income was $13,625.
Were they specifically targeting minority groups here in the public schools to get them to become these repeat clients?
We just have to look at where their facilities are located.
Right.
And until recently, there was not a single abortion clinic located in a white middle-class area. They were all located in Black areas. In 1984, Planned Parenthood came to San Antonio, Texas, and hired a Hispanic marketing firm to learn how to market to the Hispanic population, i.e. the fastest growing in the nation and the fastest growing in the abortion numbers and in the teen pregnancy numbers.
I began to get into iodine a few years ago because it was helping me and my family so much get healthy and detoxify. I believe our research is conclusive. This is the best iodine out there. And I know this for a fact. Nobody else has got iodine based on these pure crystals, ladies and gentlemen. For a limited time, experience the ancient power of Survival Shield X2. Take advantage of this unprecedented 30% off Super Detox special at InfoWarsLife.com. The facts are in. The studies are legion. Sodium fluoride and other toxic members of the fluoride family are devastating the health and cognitive ability of the American people. So why are the social engineers adding it to the water? Simple. Dumb down the host population that the parasitic technocracy is feeding on. We may not have been able to get fluoride out of the water supply yet, but we can help to get it out of our bodies. I am extremely excited to announce the exclusive InfoWars Life Fluoride Shield formulation, fusing 6 of the best documented ingredients from around the world to help the body remove not just toxic fluoride residues from the body, but a whole host of toxic substances. Let's take a stand against the globalists by blocking their poisons with Fluoride Shield. I use Fluoride Shield every day. Secure your Fluoride Shield and other pioneering formulations at InfoWarsLife.com today. Let's start cleansing our bodies now and support the Info War at the same time. That's InfoWarsLife.com.
Audit the Fed? How about starting by auditing your own mortgage? That's what our guest today, Greg Morse, did. Now, he's somebody, this is not his first rodeo. He got his start back in the S&L crisis of the 1980s. He was one of the first investigators to find out what was going on with the fraud that was committed at that time. It's a different time today. People can violate the law and not have to pay a penalty. But we have some actionable items for you. What he found when he looked at his own mortgage was 1,000 incidents of criminal and civil statutes that had been violated in just his mortgage. Now, this is a story that hits at the heart of the corruption with the mega bankers, of course, who are enslaving us, who are robbing us, who are sending us to war. This is a story that starts the break of the chain of title, that starts with a complete dissolution of our property records, our system of property records, the fraud inherent in that, the largest case of tax fraud, the largest case of security fraud, the largest bankruptcy case ever. All of these things are part of this story that we're going to cover. And of course, it leads from the beginning of your mortgage and the breaking of the chain of title up through the Federal Reserve to Swiss banks to black operations that are funded out of that money that is then hidden. So we're going to give you a plan of action. We're going to tell you what you can do to basically kick the globalist bankers in the nuts and to do something about throwing their employees on Capitol Hill in jail. Joining me on the phone tonight is Greg Morse. Now, Greg's a former F-4 Phantom driver for the U.S. Air Force, U.S. Navy, and a lieutenant commander for the U.S. Navy. He was self-employed for 30 years in real estate, all areas of aviation industry as well. And this is key. He was one of a very small group that uncovered the savings and loan crisis in 1985. Tell us a little bit about what you discovered back in 1985, because that has some bearing on how you got back involved with this particular instance.
David, what we found was that back in those days, the S&L entities were prone to lying about their economics to the public on their reports with, at that time, the Federal Savings and Loan Insurance Corporation, similar to the FDIC for banks. And what they were doing is they had 2 sets of books, basically. They were telling the world that the picture for their institution economically was one thing, when in fact the reality on the second set of books was something totally different.
Now, you got involved in this at the very beginning because of your personal issues. You were working at the bank to finance an aviation business that you're working on at the time, and you found out that your bank was insolvent, right?
Yeah, they were claiming they were $1 billion plus in the black, and in fact, when we went over and got involved with FISLIC over in Las Colinas, over in the mid-cities area of Dallas, they were over $400 million in the red.
Wow. In the late 2000s, you had some people contact you and ask you if you would look into this. You weren't directly involved because you didn't have a loan that was in default, but they asked you to take a look at this, right?
That's correct. I had a home mortgage, but at that point I was basically retired, David, and the only thing I had was a current note, never late. What we found and have documented on our website, in my singular mortgage, we identified over 1,000 individually documented and legally cited events of either outright fraud or statute and code, state and federal violations of law.
Okay, now I want to go over the tax fraud issues, the security fraud issues, what's going on in the bankruptcy court. And as I pointed out in the introduction, this is the largest tax fraud case ever. It's the largest security fraud we've ever seen. And of course, the largest bankruptcy we've ever seen. And this ties into black operations, terrorist events, overthrows of government. We want to get into all that. That's the big picture, but let's take it a little bit at a time. Let's first go to the tax fraud issue. Explain the significance of the fact that you filed a RICO civil lawsuit in 3 states. Why did you do that for?
We filed it because we've had a federal civil pro se, meaning I represent myself, lawsuit filed initially in the Eastern District of Texas Federal District Court. What we have found since we've been at it for almost 3.5 years now, the case has promulgated into being in 3 different courts in 3 different states. And as of today, we still have not been allowed to have our first hearing of any kind. Wow. So what they've attempted to do clearly, and it's all on the docket, we can prove every single word we're saying with court-entered documents on the court dockets, is that they don't want the evidence, which now exceeds 15,000 pages. They don't want that evidence coming out. So what they've tried to do is to play the shuffle off the buffalo country boy kick the can routine with us by judges lying, lawyers lying, submitting fraudulent documents. Then we challenge them. They admit on the record that, yes, they did submit fraudulent documents. We're sorry. We didn't think you really wanted us to tell the truth. But now that you're motioning us for sanctions and motions to compel, now we'll give you the real truth. So they've been trying to keep me, in addition to the threats and all the rest of the malarkey that goes with it, they've been attempting to keep this case from coming out into the public. Not because of me. This is not about my case. This is about the fact that we have been able to take what we learned going down that rabbit hole, and we have been able to determine 3 things. 1, it is in fact the largest income tax evasion fraud in recorded history in this country. Second, it is the largest securities fraud in recorded history. And thirdly, a significant percentage, and until we were to under legal auspices or the joint congressional hearing that we're pressing for, got the hard drives of data from the other entities involved, David. I can't give you an exact percentage or dollar amount, but many of the dollars that were stolen from the American public through the mortgage crisis found their way through the Depository Trust and Clearing Corporation at 55 Water Street in Wall Street. They went from there to the Federal Reserve, then to the Union Bank of Switzerland, and many of those funds have been used to proffer terrorist activities and black ops.
And we got your website up there right now. Give us that website address.
It's that we have 2 of them. It's saveourfamilyandhome.com.
That's what we're seeing right now.
That's our evidence repository. And then redpillreports.com is our news marketing organization that communicates everything we're doing.
Now, one of the things I said in the introduction was this even touches on possibly on some of these banker suicides. We've seen a rash of banker suicides at a time when these guys are doing really well. And it's not like it's the Depression where they're jumping out of windows, but a lot of people have died under mysterious circumstances. But I want to go to this, and that is Brad Birkenfeld. Now, he got $104 million from the IRS for exposing secretive banking operations and tax evasions involving UBS and the Swiss banking system. That all came about because of Brad Birkenfeld's whistleblowing. Yet, when he came to the Department of Justice with this information, nobody went to jail. Even after all this came to light, nobody went to jail except for the whistleblower himself, Brad Birkenfeld. That's where he met Scott Bennett in prison. Scott Bennett was in the Army. He was with Booz Allen Hamilton, blew the whistle on some of the things that he discovered to his superiors. He was sent to jail, I believe, on some trumped up charges that look pretty phony.
They spent 6 months living together in this white-collar jail up in Pennsylvania, in which they exchanged documents, stories, and dotted the I's and crossed the T's. And it appears, since Birkenfeld has not been available to us, it appears, and we have all the documented communiques to the military, to Congress, just as we do in my case on the whistleblower document, they are obviously running to hide. They do not want this coming out in any way, and they're doing everything they can to either not respond, or in my case, to Scott, or in my case, we've had 4 formal responses from 4 of the largest government agencies, which have in writing put their signatures on it to my attention. It's on the website for people to see, which says all of this stuff is outside our jurisdiction, including the Department of Justice.
Exactly. But of course, the Department of Justice was involved in the whistleblowers case. They sent him to jail for a couple of years. As he got out, he was handed a check for $104 million from the IRS for being a whistleblower. And as they had, after they had convicted him, the prosecutor, Kevin Downey, said that he needed the judge to give him some more time with the whistleblower because he was getting so much key intel from him. Don't take him away and send him to jail just yet. So admitted that it was very important. Now, one of the things that I want to pull out, which again hits possibly to these banker suicides, is how it looks like he was possibly set up, according to Scott Bennett. When Brad came from Switzerland to talk to the Department of Justice initially, shortly after that, one of his friends back in London, where he was living, got a communique from the Swiss bank, UBS, asking him why he had contacted them. They essentially had received a letter that was unsigned, that was in the name of this London friend who didn't know anything about this, because Brad Birkenfeld had done this secretively, had traveled there secretly to talk to the Department of Justice. Yet somebody who knew that he had talked to the Department of Justice had contacted UBS in the name of this friend who didn't know anything about it, presumably hoping that UBS would do something about it or do something to him, I presume. But yet they called this London friend, who was absolutely astonished, and then called Birkenfeld for an explanation. You want to comment on that?
Quite frankly, I'd rather let Scott at a later date go into all that detail, because he was much closer to the topic than I. What I can tell you is that if it looks like a duck, walks like a duck, quacks like a duck, let's don't shy away from making the ultimate conclusionary statement. That is, it's a duck. Yeah. These guys are covering this up because they know we're on their trail. They're afraid of it, and they don't know how to stop it, because we're in a position now where they cannot stop us from getting all the way to the Supreme Court and going to the Congress of the United States.
Greg, let's get down to some of the details of this tax evasion issue. And of course, at the heart of it is MERS. And we've talked to Dave Krieger about Clouded Title. He's the author of Clouded Title. We've talked about how they break the chain of title, how they evade taxes at the local county level. And of course, we all have to make up that tax revenue that the bankers don't pay when they break the chain of title and they securitize these instruments. But that's just the tip of the iceberg. That's the key to the tax evasion. And it gets down to something that I think a lot of people may not understand, and that is the REMICs that were created in the late 1980s, real estate mortgage investment conduit. Tell us a little bit about how that is at the core of the tax issue, the REMICs.
Okay, it's real simple, and I'm going to keep it very short. The procedure goes like this. You buy your house, it gets commingled into a trust, just an outright trust. Typically, of the thousands and thousands that were developed, they were, for the most part, all done under the trust laws of the state of New York, for obvious reasons, which we'll talk about. What would happen is that when those trusts were cleared out, meaning they said, we've got enough in this one trust, what would happen is they would typically file reports with the SEC for anywhere from 9 to 15 months. At the end of that period, they would file another SEC form, and I'm not even going to quote the forms because I don't want to confuse people with all the technical intricacy. But they would file a form, David. It is not a form that requires review, scrutiny, or approval by anybody at the IRS or the SEC. It's a simple filing. They file this form and they say three things. One, we now have less than 300 owners of this trust. Number two, therefore, we are going to opt out of paying federal income tax. And third, we don't have to file any further quarterly reports with you. So we go into the ether, into the black, and you don't, at that point, know anything further about us.
Yeah, and let's point out that when they say they don't have to pay any tax, they made the argument that they were getting double taxation. Every corporation has and can make that argument. A lot of people have said we need to stop taxing corporations and businesses because that's just an invisible tax that's passed along to consumers, like a VAT tax. So fine, they're getting taxed double taxation, but the only people that get relief from double taxation are, of course, the bankers who have these employees in Washington called congressmen and senators. So they passed this REMIC construct, which says, basically, as you just pointed out, they can make an assertion, file a piece of paper and say, we're no longer under your supervision, we don't have to pay taxes. But the key thing is that they have a clear, one of the key things, provisions of this REMIC, is that they have to have a clear chain of title in these mortgages. Once they break that chain of title, now they are liable to taxes.
Now you're hitting it spot on. Here's the issue. There are two classifications of mortgages that surface in these trusts. One is called a qualifying mortgage, and the other one is a non-qualifying mortgage. Now, to be a qualified mortgage, there are a number of requirements, the first and most important of which is the fact that the chain of title is not broken.
And we don't really have to even go any further into the details of that because we've got a lot of stuff to cover. But that right there says that they are asserting that they don't have to pay taxes, but they themselves broke the chain of title, and now they are due to pay those taxes, but they're evading that. Now, I want to get to what happened when because you filed whistleblower status on the tax fraud. You filed with the SEC about security fraud, but I want to lay out the basis of both of those before we get the reaction of those. One thing I want to tell the audience, and I got this from the American Bar Association's website, talking about MERS. They say MERS is a separate corporation, of course, acting solely as nominee for the lender and lender successee. And on every one of these mortgages, they'll put down the quotation that MERS is now the mortgagee under the security instrument. However, they point out on the American Bar Association that MERS is not named on any of these notes. And they say, well, this is interesting because the legal status of the private recording system was not modified by Congress. And so they created their own rules, their own laws, their own organizations. It was the banks who created MERS. It was the banks who created DTCC that we're going to talk about here in just a moment. But then they point out this. They said this would cause REMICs, what we're talking about, breaking the chain of title, this would cause those REMICs to lose their preferred tax status. Surprisingly, the American Bar Association says, surprisingly, however, the IRS appears to be unresponsive to the issue so far. And this failure probably contributed to the financial crisis to some extent. You think so? What do you think, Greg?
I think that's a well-chosen set of politically correct terms all put together in complete sentences. It's baloney, it's malarkey, it's fraud on the American people, it's a lie.
Yeah.
They broke the chains of title as soon as that mortgage went into MERS. And we have all of the MERS internal control documents that other people do not have. Mm-hmm. Those documents show clearly that their intent was to, by design, separate the mortgage or the deed of trust from the note. Yeah. You can clearly prove that by going to the Fannie Mae, the government-sponsored enterprise that's bankrupt, that's now owned by the federal government, who owns, theoretically, your at least promissory note. As soon as you break the promissory note from the deed of trust under Carpenter v. Longan, they cannot be reattached without an act of the court with the compliance of the homeowner. That means once it's dead, it's dead. Mm-hmm. That means that when the chains of title are broken, they're no longer qualified to be in a trust. Then when they make the tax I want to call it tax avoidance election by being classified as a real estate mortgage investment conduit, they lose that tax exemption because the underlying mortgages no longer legally comply with the law.
That's right. Tax avoidance at that point becomes tax evasion. They're breaking the law. I want to move on quickly to the security fraud because I find it interesting that MERS, and for those of you who don't, that's the Mortgage Electronic Registration System. That was created in 1995. It was created by the banks, for the banks, to serve the banks. They also, around that time, in 1999, they established the Depository Trust and Clearing Corporation, DTCC. So they're creating these new organizations, these new structures, completely changing the rules of how we pass title of property along. Always in the past, that's been done with recorded mortgages at the local courthouse. There's been a clear record of who owns what as title pass on. They broke all of that. They did it with electronic system, and then they create this DTCC. And before I get your comments on this, I just want to tell people, in 2011, DTCC settled the vast majority of security transactions U.S. close to $1.7 quadrillion in value, did it worldwide. In 2007 alone, they settled transactions worth $513 trillion. They processed 325 million book entry deliveries, and they retained custody of 3.5 million security issues worth about $40 trillion, including securities issued in the U.S. and more than 100 other countries. That's why this is an international story. This isn't something that just affects homeowners in the United States, but it affects investors who are domestic, investors who are abroad. Let's talk now about this other creation besides MERS that they created as they were changing all the rules. And I think this is key, Greg. This is not something that just happened. We have been saying this all along. Many people have been saying this all along. Of course, the collapse in the mortgage industry wasn't something that was just happened. This was built up, deliberately created with these illegal constructs, changing the rules of the game, doing this without any oversight, pumping the industry up and then bursting the bubble and then getting bailed out. And that's what we see now. But we're going to go even further than this. As you point out, we're going to follow this all the way into the Black Ops. Talk about DTCC. Talk about their connection to the Federal Reserve.
They're the single largest, most powerful private entity who sits on the Federal Reserve, i.e. they control the Federal Reserve.
Yes, exactly. Now, talk about how you've seen, we see the securities fraud, right? Because if we start out with fraudulent documents and they sell these fraudulent documents where they don't really have a perfected chain of title, that's security fraud, right?
Correct.
Okay. So now you've taken this information, you filed a whistleblower status with both the IRS and the SEC because they both have programs where if somebody sees illegal activity, there's a legal procedure that you followed. You got recognized by that to say, I've seen problems here. Here's the details. You sent them a ton of information. Tell us about that.
The only thing we've received from the IRS and the SEC are legal notifications saying that our filings are in compliance with law, and they will, when they get around to it, take a look at it.
This is a huge crime, and we've seen a lot of bankers, they've been ruled suicides. You're exposing the largest tax evasion case, the largest security frauds case, and you're involved in the largest bankruptcy case. You've had some pushback against the personally also, haven't you?
Oh, yeah. Death threats, personal attacks, house break-ins, vehicle defamations, all kinds of things. Yeah. They're doing everything and it's all SOG stuff. It's not Bloods and Crips. It's all Special Operations Group coming out of Langley because the tells are all real clear. And I come out of the asymmetric warfare background. And so the tells are all there. So we know what they're doing. And the only way we're going to get this out, David, is to get the American people to be aware of the magnitude and the size of this problem and the degree to which they are all being affected. It affects your 401k. It affects your checkbook, all the topics that you've discussed for a long time on InfoWars. It affects all of those things.
Yeah.
And the conclusion is that they're taking the money from us illegally, and then they're using it to kill not just homeowners who have, divorces and family breakups and stress and suicides. They're using it to fund those very people that turn around and kill our men and servicewomen.
And we've seen that just this last month. We've had a lot of families and survivors in the military sue 6 banks, saying that they've been funding terrorism. And this is something that's going beyond money laundering. This is what you're talking about is direct funding. And we've talked about this for a long time. This is a way, if we can break this, if we can expose this. And I want to talk about how people can get directly involved because people get so frustrated in this. They say, well, we got all this information and we don't know what to do with it, or nothing has been done about this. You've got a plan of action. People can join in on this. It's not going to cost them anything to do this. But let's first talk just really briefly about the largest bankruptcy in history, because you sent all of this information to, they've now declared bankruptcy, 51 entities, the largest bankruptcy in history. You sent all this information to the bankruptcy judge there, and what did he do?
The bankruptcy judge, Judge Martin Glenn, said, I'm not going to look at this evidence.
Now, you have standing because of the RICO statutes. That's part of why you filed these RICO lawsuits, I should say. That's part of why you filed them.
Yes, and it is illegal for him not to accept and put on the docket our evidence, which we did eventually get done, but not because the judge was allowing himself to behave in a legal, ethical, proper manner.
Okay, now one more thing I want to cover on the bankruptcy thing, and then we'll get to the action item here. And that is what's happening with Berkshire Hathaway, our favorite billionaire Warren Buffett, and another company called Ocwen that many people may not know about. But Ocwen has been indicted for criminal activity in 49 states. Now, Warren Buffett and Ocwen have a special deal on this fire sale from the bankruptcy court. There's $400 billion worth of mortgages that it looks like they're going to get for $5 billion. That's not even pennies on the dollar. That's for like 1 cent on the dollar. But there's something else that's even more important than that. Tell us about the way they can shield the information with this and why they would want to do that.
Well, it's real simple. It gives them the ability, David, to cover up their fraud. Judge Martin Glenn has already found and ordered that Berkshire Hathaway, i.e. Warren Buffett, and Ocwen Loan Servicing are turned what's called bankruptcy remote. That means when they buy this $400+ billion worth of mortgages that affect I think it's 2,200 and something total mortgages, because we broke this case. I was the first one that went after this because I knew what was going on. I was a party to it, and I challenged them. And so what happened here is that Martin Glenn said once Berkshire Hathaway's and Ocwen wins the bidding process, which I think was absolutely a setup, it was not an open free market bid. It was a behind the doors deal. They got classified as bankruptcy remote, which means that you, David, if you find out that your mortgage has somehow been compromised, which you can tell by going to our website, clicking on the link at the top of the page that says, how was your mortgage compromised? We lead you right through it in about 28 steps. It takes you 30 minutes. It'll give you some great insight. What happens is that means that you cannot and you do not have any legal standing to go after Berkshire Hathaway or Ocwen Loan Servicing, and they're hiding behind the signature of Judge Martin Glenn on that bankruptcy court order.
But fraudulent bankruptcy doesn't offer that kind of privacy. So that can be penetrated if we can prove the fraud. And just as a quick aside before we move on to the action thing, one of the reasons you said that you believe that it was something that was transferred without a competitive process was because they were trying to distribute the assets even before they really had trustees in place, correct?
Yes, on day one, when they filed a petition, they filed a motion which asked the judge, before the trustees were even in place.
And of course, I know a little bit about bankruptcy court because I was involved in one as a creditor. I know that the trustees working for the court, they get a commission on this. It's an incentive to try to liquidate this stuff as quickly as possible. Whoever does this is probably going to make hundreds of millions of dollars, whoever that bankruptcy trustee is. He's going to make a lot of money off of this. Now, let's get to the action items. How can people get involved? You already said they can go to your website. They can look up and see if their mortgage, what the status of their mortgage is. But how can people get involved and take them down?
Okay, you either go to saveourfamilyandhome.com, great big button on the top of the homepage, or you go to redpillreports.com. Same thing. Click on the link. It will take you to a demand jurisdictionally sound petition, which is claiming on our behalf that we are demanding, based on our evidence, open, joint congressional hearings in front of the media, the public, and all members of the joint seated House and Congress, House and Senate.
Okay, now why do you think that's going to work? I mean, we've had a massive demonstration. We had 500,000 people show up back in 2009 on September 12th in Washington, protesting the banker fraud. I mean, they were angry about it. They said, we don't want this bailout. We don't have to pay for their quote unquote mistakes. It wasn't a mistake. It was by design. But what are we going to do with this? How is this going to be different from just the general anger that people have when you've got this behind you in the documentation?
It's a perfect question. Here's the answer. The answer is we have a jurisdictional basis when the American people come together and sign the petition as registered voters in this country. We have the jurisdictional basis to force this to happen. It's going to be a fight. But you see, you can go do a protest. That's an activist act.
Yes.
This is an actional act.
Yes, this is a legal act.
Actionalism.
Yes, this is action. It's legal action. It's not just a protest. It's not burning down a neighborhood. This is a way that people can channel their anger into a legal action. And of course, they can sign that petition for free. They can get the letters for free at your website that they can send a template that they can send to their congressman. You've sent all this information to all the congressmen and senators, as well as all these different federal agencies that basically don't want to do anything with it.
That's correct. And in addition, we're collecting a lot of the evidence, which I am certain, and best that we not, David, go into too much detail on this, but a lot of the information and evidence which these individual congressmen and senators by name would rather not have come public. So we're preparing for an all-out, constitutionally republic-based, peaceful, jurisdictionally empowered action against them, and we will disclose all the information that we have if they try to push back, cover up, or don't give us the hearing. That means that all the congressmen and the senators are going to have to go back to their districts and face their constituents.
Well, that's key. And one of the things that I think is when some of these people see that they're facing jail because of tax evasion, security frauds, once they see that, I think they're going to start singing. That's going to start the dominoes in effect, and I think a lot of people are going to start singing with that. Thank you so much, Greg Morris, for your research, for getting in touch with us, letting us know what you're doing with this. I think this is something that people can get involved with, that they can take legal action with and not just voice their frustration. Thank you so much.
David, thank you very much.
Bye-bye. And again, I want to thank J.D. Moore and the folks at redpillreports.com for passing on Greg's information to us, getting him in touch with us. Now, if you're watching this on YouTube, please subscribe to our channel if you're not a subscriber there. And if you're not a subscriber to Prison Planet TV, please consider becoming a subscriber. Right now, we have a half-off special as part of the end of the year Christmas special. It's something that you can share with 12 people at the same time, and you can have access, all of you, to all of Alex Jones's documentaries. And of course, it helps to fund our operation. Join us weeknights, 7 Central, 8 p.m. Eastern.
Celebrate the spirit of freedom and liberty upon which our nation was founded at InfoWarsShop.com. Molon Lave is ancient Greek for come and take it. This popular design combines both classic Greek Spartan imagery with modern M16 assault rifles. Now available in women's tees and proudly made in the USA. Celebrate the spirit of 1776 with the George Washington brass belt buckle or this incredibly sharp-looking 1776 hat. Badass. And be sure to check out the new arrivals at InfoWars Life, where you can prepare your body to perform at peak levels with Survival Shield, Nascent Iodine, Super Male Vitality, and Fluoride Shield. And wake up, America. Immune Support Blend is the healthy choice for the gourmet coffee lover. So get incredibly high-quality, freedom-based products and help fund the revolution at InfoWarsShop.com.
You are watching the InfoWars Nightly News, which airs 7 p.m. Central at InfoWarsNews.com. Members can share their passcodes with up to 11 other people, and your support is helping us defend liberty worldwide.